Well, it's a rainy day, and even though there's other things we probably should be doing or could be doing, we are reevaluating, which is something we do all the time because when you're growing food for yourself, i.e., homesteading, change is something that you're going to have to get used to over and over and over again. So before we even get into this, I'm going to say it right now because we were talking about this before we decided to film anything. This is probably going to bore the heck out of a lot of people, and that's fine if you don't find this interesting. But we're a long ways into our homesteading career. I guess you call it that, the growing food, just call it that. And we have reevaluated things numerous times, and we've changed numerous times. And it's almost, I think, in the last few years. Obviously, we started our YouTube journey later after we had like a decade or more into this. You're seeing us at kind of an advanced or well into it time frame, I guess. But we're in one of those slight changes again. And no, this is not a big, profound change. This is just, I'm going to say it, as the world around us keeps changing, you're trying to predict what might affect you in the future. And the vast majority of us are not completely isolated, no matter how much we'd like to be, independent, etc. If we live near other people, we're still affected by what goes on around us. We're just trying to make it a little more manageable, a little more within the realm of something that will continue to work for us so that we can keep doing it, because things can get out of hand pretty quickly.
So, as most of you know, we love numbers, we love tracking things, and the more we track, the more we learn, and the more we realize that there is some need for change. About 2 years ago, we did a video on how much food we needed to grow for a family of 4. And we'll link that above here right now because, to be honest, as we've done this for 2 years and tracked things, we've realized there's some definite flexibility in what we put in that video. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But running through the numbers, we realize maybe in some areas we're putting away more, and maybe in some areas we're a little bit short. We did an interesting little look just a few hours ago at a website about how much Canadians consume for dairy, for meat, all those sorts of things. And the numbers were pretty close to what we had thought from that video. And then we went to our record keeping for 2021 and 2022 and looked at the poundage of food that we brought in those categories, and definitely realized we were pretty spot on, but in some areas a little bit higher than what was actually required, which is certainly making us look at a few things because as cost of feed, cost of infrastructure, and all those sorts of things go up, we need to reevaluate just how much livestock and soil even we need on the homestead.
So certainly it's no surprise to people, livestock of any kind are going to be the most taxing because you have to feed them. But I will say there's also a compromise of labor that kind of livestock can compete with gardens, for example, because where we live, our garden season by Canadian standards is quite long, but it's still pretty short. And so when things compete, nothing gets done well. We're by no means saying that we're going to reduce or eliminate the animal foods that we produce, but we're really trying to keep a good rein in on it, because you don't want that exponential creep, because that can really hurt your homestead. I think this is where keeping track, especially on that sort of stuff, is paramount. Now, I would argue just as readily keeping track of what you produce on the produce, the vegetable side of things is just as important, because you can really see, not that it's always weight-based, but you can really see what's important versus what's just not working. And sometimes you just have to decide what's not working just has to go, because if you're not doing this to make money, you're doing it to save money, it can't constantly put you in the hole, whether that's time, resources, or money.
So as you've seen in our video prior to this one, we did decide not to try to do dairy this year. It's just not in the cards. And this is one thing that we're analyzing with all this data is it has to be enjoyable, it has to be manageable, it has to be doable. And that means it has to be realistic. And we've kind of broke down the poundage of meat product and things like that we need first, because that was the easiest to really look at and hone in on. And it's kind of interesting because we're aiming for about 400 pounds for our family of 4. That's not including eggs, which we always kind of included eggs, but when you start looking at the averages, it doesn't include that sort of stuff. So we've kind of worked it out. We need 175 pounds of lamb, 75 pounds of goose, 50 pounds of chicken, and 100 pounds of rabbit. That's something we're really stepping up this year, so kind of stay tuned to see if that works out for us. We've got some plans, so hopefully it does, because that's pushing them more than we've ever pushed our rabbits. But definitely on the sheep front, we're noticing we produce way more sheep than we need. And we're not doing this as a business, as Chris just said. It is to save money, not to make money. And therefore, when we start analyzing our expenses going back, we see the sheep has had exponential creep very, very badly, I think. And so that's something we're really taking a step back and looking at and analyzing and choosing the best of our best and all that sort of stuff, which maybe we'll do another video on later if somebody's actually interested in a little more detail on how we've kind of made some of these decisions that we're making.
And how we plan to go forward.
Exactly. But that's sort of the breakdown of the meat thing, which that's the most expensive part. I mean, we were looking at last year's numbers and we spent over $4,000 on hay last year just to feed the sheep. And when you start looking at those numbers, you're not saving money anymore. It's just not happening. And that's what's happening on a lot of things in today's day and age, because you've got creep not only on meat in the grocery store, but also on feed for animals at home and even seeds, things like that. There's creep everywhere. So you've got to kind of watch those things in order to make sure that it doesn't get past the point of no return for your homestead.
Well, this might seem like a bit of a weird video because maybe we haven't really said much other than we're going through this thought process. And I think a lot of people downplay this, and this is because it's boring, to be quite honest. Who wants to think about this? It's far more fun to just keep plunging ahead. But if you don't think about it, your potential for failure realistically is going to be a lot higher. And that's not good, because if you're trying to do it for long term, to be more sustainable, help feed yourself, that sort of things, and all the other stuff that goes along with that, like, this is an important metric to keep tracking. We focused on the animal side of it right now because, like we said, we tend to do that because that's the most intensive from a resource perspective. But we're not sugarcoating the fact that the gardening, and I'm mostly talking about a lot of the annual type garden plants, that's a lot of work in a very condensed time frame. So we may touch on that kind of going forward, because that's something we're going to look at too, because we're kind of doing the same thing. We look at everything as trying to keep populations. Maybe we can't be the complete island, but you also don't necessarily want to be dependent, at least in our opinion, of always having to go buy more, because that's potentially setting you up for failure at some point too, right? We've seen that with chickens and seeds and all this other stuff. So finding that kind of happy medium, that balance, if it were, between trying to be as self-sufficient as possible, trying to be as sustainable as possible, but still, I'm going to say, enjoying life and finding the joy in it, and it not just completely taking you over. Because unless you can just do this and not have to work off farm, not have to pay for mortgages, not have to do all those other things that we all have to do, it's a lot. When you're basically looking at, a second full-time job or more than full-time job on top of what you're already doing. So maybe it's some food for thought, or a thought for food, as it were. And we'll kind of leave you at that, I suppose. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about some of our garden stuff and some of the deeper dives, if people are interested, because let's face it, it's boring, into some of our thought processes on some of the changes we sort of alluded to here.